In St. Louis, one of the young religious scholar, he happens to be Imam, and who came across a newly reverted or converted lady who became a Muslim, and asked the permission of the parents, just for, this is more like cultural family, really definitely you inform the parents, okay, even though you grow up, your age of marriage, you're qualified to get married, and then they're asking the Somali parents, they live there, and they're asking their consent or permission, or they're informing them, look, I met this one, she's already Muslimah, I want to marry her, what do you think about it, opinion? And they, out of their wisdom, and they said, that when you get married, no problem, you can get married. That when you have children, the children are very attached to the grandparents. So they usually, and then I'm a new grandparent, I can see that how close, how dear the grandparents are. So when you children will have, and that the mother of that young lady is not a Muslim, they are traditional, maybe Christians most likely, and then only children, they will get in touch with the Christian grandparents. So they will grow up with their Christian grandparents according to their culture and then most likely their religion, and will not be there. So he decided not to do that, and then he got married to Somali. That's the end of the story, which is good ending. And here an example, I witnessed that marriage, that in Moberly, the place I practice, there's a young man got married to a lady. Sure enough, the lady did not become a Muslimah. That she, they are allowed to do so, as our Ustada explained that. And then what happened, end result is they have two children, and they got divorced. And then the lady found another man was more interesting than this man, and then he left him. And then the two children, now they are being raised with the grandchildren. And the grandfather is a priest in a church, and they are growing up as a Christian now. They gave the Muslim name, but they changed the name. When I asked them, so why they changed, like for example, Zabed into Reagan, and he told me the English name of Zabed is the Reagan. Tried to make me understand that's probably the fact. It's not. But see, that's the difficulty. That's the difficulty, when you grow up, exactly the good example here. And these two men, then he's waiting, when they grow up, maybe they will come back to me, I will help them to follow my religion. So it's a struggle and a challenge. And so somebody, our young brothers, sisters, or son and daughters, think about it. And I think there's a wonderful wisdom out of the Somali parent they gave, and then their son, his very wise son, followed the advice of them.
Great. We got another question coming. All right. Let me go with this one first. What is the wisdom behind Muslim women not being allowed to marry non-Muslim men?
So clearly you were not present during the presentation. Whoever asked that, no, I'm not going to embarrass anyone. Okay, so the reasons that were at least given from the purely scholarly perspective, again, were that Muslim women of the time and space that we're talking about 6th, 7th century Arabia, were, if they were to marry someone who was not Muslim, they had no guarantee that their rights as a Muslim and the obligations and the rituals of Islam would be permitted for them to follow. Now, and actually, maybe one of you could answer to the concept within Christian or the Judeo-Christian texts, are Christian and Jewish men required to, from a purely textual and legalistic perspective, are they mandated to protect the religion of their non-Christian or Jewish wife?
Phrase it again.
So from the original sources of Christianity, are Christian men mandated by divine law to secure the non-Christian religious identity of their spouse?
And the right of the spouse to practice their religion.
And the right of the spouse to practice their faith. From the very original. See, because we don't know of Christian law per se, right?
There is none.
As we know of.
As such,
right.
it may grow up. They may make it a law according to their culture,
Right.
but it's not in the scriptures to do so, because there's plenty of evidence in early Christianity of intermarriages with other groups, with Jews, because in the beginning, they were Jews.
Right.
You know, Christians were Jews. And it didn't really become defined until really a century later.
So that's
Yeah.
kind of one of the reasons given. Now, the postmodern question ultimately is, well, what if that is secure, right? Like your partner, if he's a devout Catholic, and you have agreed in your premarital counseling or whatnot, that you will be able to practice your own religious tradition, and that your kids will be practicing Islam or whatever you guys have chose. Again, kids are a whole different conversation, right? Nothing ever goes as planned. So the reformist approach of some Muslim scholars today, and they're very few, but they do exist, is that as long as that has been secured, right? That the rights of your marriage and the practice of your marriage is being permitted, then therefore the contract itself should be considered valid. Majority of Muslim scholars, like I said, throughout time have disagreed that that could ever be the case, meaning majority of Muslim scholars have always consistently concurred that there can be no marriage outside of the faith for Muslim women. Now, if you're asking me personally, I can just tell you from a very, from a practitioner perspective, as a chaplain, as someone who advises people in premarital counseling sessions, and again, I am younger and have many years left for fulfillment and experience to your great legacy. Are you there? Oh, okay, all right. So this guy, he can't comment really. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. But you know, and maybe this will help elaborate some of this, because I want to bring this, because I know a lot of what I've said is like, oh, well, here's the theory. Even for someone like myself who grew up here, you know, I'm also South Asian, I'm Indian. And so, you know, in addition to my Muslim identity, I have this, you know, Indian side of me, which means that my mother, as I was getting closer to like 23, 24, 25, you know, was like, you know, you need to get married, and that was like her mantra. And I remember I was in grad school, and I was on, you know, the computer and writing some paper, and she found out how to get on Facebook, and she was like texting me, and she's like, I know you're not writing a paper, you need to get married, and she would send me these, you know, these bios of, you know, Muslim men, and, you know, many of them who were physicians, right, anesthesiologists, and all of those great, you know, fields, and, you know, and I never imagined that was the way I was going to get married. I always thought it was like on the plane to some exotic Muslim, you know, country or something. But that's how I actually did meet my husband, who went through, you know, the red flags with my father, right, or the supposed red flags or whatever. My father actually met him several times before I did. You know, he was like, yes, he's clear, you know. Yeah, if anyone knows my father, he's really interesting. So eventually, right, there was this concept of, okay, is this person the right person for me? And, you know, within the given parameters, Muslims don't date necessarily, but we do have courtships, right, in open spaces and with family. And so eventually, I do have a point to all this, the process in itself of finding this companion for life, inshallah khair, really is an arduous task. I mean, marriage requires a lot of work. And yes, you know, people look at it, I think, in different ways. But for the most part, I would refer to the Quran when it says that really it's seen as an opportunity for living life to its fullest with a companion who is there with you through all of life's challenges and struggles, and allows you to grow into a better human being and a better person. And there are those who have found, I think, that mixture or that recipe with someone who is of a different faith, perhaps. But I would argue that for someone who has a very deep conviction in a particular faith, I would argue that, you know, they most likely will want someone. Again, this is based on conjecture, and I don't have any statistics to prove it because I don't know any current research that's being done on interfaith marriages. But for them, I would argue that people would want to be with someone who is on that spiritual path. And for anyone who wants to seek wisdom or can see the wisdom in that, you know, I would say that that would be my answer to you. That, you know, marriage is not easy, and it's beautiful, but it's work. It's work, and every day is a different day, and you're learning about this other person. And even if you've lived with this person before, and even if you've had, you think you know this person, you know, life takes you into different places, and the challenges that you face and are always growing in you, and you have to be able to continue to love this person and be committed. So, in all of the different, you know, layers of the stratification, you know, you would think that having someone who is with you on a similar path, a spiritual and ritual path, is very significant. And if you can't see the wisdom in that, then let's talk afterwards.
All right, got some more here. All right, I'm gonna go with this one. This is not exactly about interfaith marriage, but it's a hot topic. Is same-sex marriage allowed in Islam? If not, why?
Why don't we give the others a chance? Not that I don't want to answer the question, but
What's the slot that?
Well,
okay, fine, in Islam. Okay, the Muslims are like, let's not talk about it.
I'm learning too.
Okay, great. Okay, all right. So again, the consensus of Muslim ulama throughout history and even currently is that same-sex marriage is not permitted, and I am saying that with I know that this is a really hot topic, and this is a controversial topic in the sense that it can be very emotional. Now, having said that, does it mean that a person who is homosexual or has or someone from the LGBT community who has feelings for the same, you know, gender or sex, that they cannot be Muslim? If that's the question, then of course not. I mean, they can be Muslim. A person who has a certain feeling or a certain understanding of their sexual orientation, it doesn't negate them from being part of the Muslim community. Now, the actual marriage itself, if the question is the contract valid, will someone marry me? This is a big topic also in the UK right now. There are some Muslim imams who are initiating gay marriages. Not necessarily initiating, but officiating gay marriages. What I'd like to say about this is that I think we have to, for people who are having this conversation, a few things need to be kept in mind, and this is from a chaplaincy perspective, or someone who works with students on, at Northwestern as well as across various campuses, is that everyone has a right to their opinion, right? So from both perspectives. Someone is coming from the perspective that they have been abused or neglected or humiliated because of how they have presented their sexual orientation. That needs to be recognized and acknowledged, that they are coming from that background and that they need a space to share that feeling, right? I think what happens sometimes in Muslim communities, and maybe this is true for the other faiths as well, is that there's kind of like this closed door or kind of this mentality that I don't want to hear it, that's kind of taboo in my religion, we don't want to talk about it. I think it's important to recognize, because we can't afford as a community any longer, and this I'm sharing this with the Muslims particularly, that we cannot afford anymore to not have that conversation. I think it's important to recognize that let people who have something to say about this, let them express that feeling, and let them open that discourse. Now, at the same time, I would also then, with that same respect, say that let's not have a double standard then. Let's allow for those who disagree to have their fair share in the conversation, because that is a true dialogue. A dialogue should allow various perspectives to contribute to the conversation. Often what's happening, I think, is because both sides are not willing to really, or at least one side is sometimes seemingly not wanting to, have a dialogue, it's seen as a rejection, complete rejection of the absolute person versus the concept. And so that, I think, needs to be stated when we're talking about this. I know I'm going off a little bit on a tangent here, but really if we are to start these conversations, it can't just be like, oh, well, you know, the question is simple, right? It's like yes or no, can you have this marriage? But I think what I'm trying to suggest is that these questions do come up and they're going to continue. And the Muslim community is going to be part and parcel of that conversation, whether we like it or not. So what I'm, suggesting is that these conversations need to occur in safe spaces and in spaces that allow for both Muslims and Muslims who are part of that, or the LGBT community, to share how they're feeling, to share what's going on, and to allow the other side as well, though, to express how they're feeling about it and what are their views, because both sides have a perspective. Does that make sense?
No,
And that both sides need to be respected.
no, wait. You see, there's two different things here. Wrongdoing, mistake, sins does not remove person from faith.
Right. And that's your perspective.
Thank you.
Here.
There are two separate things. Sins and mistakes and wrongdoing and aggression, that's something. And there are very few things, mistakes remove person from the faith, which is not to believe in God and deny the scriptures and all the things. But the action does not remove person from faith. So they can still be Muslims if they make a mistake. But because even if we have 99% of people in a town who are the Muslims and practice the wrong things, that wrong thing cannot become right. That's one thing. The other thing is, as far as discussions, there's a very clear teaching from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that discussion has to be in a useful way, not to waste time and not to, what he said. God gave our Prophet, peace be upon him, guaranteed a place in paradise for a person who quit discussion when it's going nowhere, even if he's right.
Right, but
So we have to be very careful. Sometimes people like just to sit down and talk and waste their time and the time of others, sometimes just for the fancy of proof that they are right, even they don't believe in that. So we have to be very, very careful when we address issues and talk about issues.
Right, but if you look at, I guess what I was trying to express is that we're not even there yet. We're not even at the point of allowing conversations about it so that it's not seen necessarily as that the Muslim community is completely antagonistic against the LGBT community, right? I think we need to have these dialogues so that at least we can start to acknowledge that it's that we within from the legal framework, right? If there is a clear, if it's seen as something that is a sin, okay, and that is what you were saying. If it is seen as something that is not permissible, then how can we come to at least acknowledge that from the perspective of the LGBT community, they need to come to the table and they need to be able to understand that this is a perspective and this is something that that they may not share, but again, it is a perspective with its own right, and that it needs to be acknowledged on their part as well. That's what I'm saying. But we're not even there yet, because what's happening is that there is, and again, we all know of the political influences and during campaign time that, kind of stir conversations about this. But from your perspective, you're saying, well, the conversation is not even, sometimes they're just not even necessary. But from a chaplaincy perspective, I'm telling you that, look, 10% of Northwestern students identify themselves as part of the LGBT community. And I know there are Muslims who are part of that. I can't afford to not have that conversation. I can't afford to not know what's going on in their minds. I can't afford to know that So many of them are feeling like, okay, fine, I have to leave Islam. This is it. I mean, there's no other choice for me. And if that's what's happening, then that's not. I can't afford that, because unless that is their ultimate choice, of course. But I agree with you that there's a limit to how we frame these discussions and all of that. But when we haven't even started those conversations, there's a problem with that, and that's all I'm saying. That there has to be a recognition that there are perspectives, and there cannot be a double standard from both sides. Does that make sense? Okay.
No. Let's move on.
Yeah, we are going to run out of time, so we got to jet to the next question. All right, this is also not exactly about interfaith marriage, but it's an interesting question, so I'm going to, and you all asked it, so I'll throw it out there. I always thought of Jews as God's people, those that believe in God but rejected Jesus as the Messiah. I have found Jews that do not believe in God. Is this a cultural thing?
Wow. Jews not believing in God. Well, Jews do say that they are the chosen people. You could probably speak on this as well, I would assume. I would say, so you're asking Jews that don't believe in God, are they considered Jewish? Is that pretty?
I think that's the question.
Yeah, I would say probably not. You know, as a Jew, again, if you're, like I said earlier, you were born, your mother was Jewish, that means you're Jewish, that you believe in one God, a lot of faiths, a monotheistic religion, and I guess I would say by not believing, I mean that's obviously one of the main pillars of our beliefs, to say that you don't believe in God would probably mean to me that you don't consider yourself Jewish, but by law, by Jewish law, if your mother was Jewish, that means you're Jewish. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
You want to speak
From a legal perspective, the greatest Jewish philosopher, Maimonides, that was principle number one. What makes you Jewish is that you believe in one God, Tawheed, basically. Maimonides used the word Tawheed. He wrote in Arabic. So, I mean, in the modern world, it's a little different, right? You have many, many Jews, particularly in the United States and in the state of Israel, who consider themselves Jewish, who do not believe in God at all. And so what, are we going to tell them that they're not Jewish? But traditional Jewish law says you have to believe in God.
I mean, if you were to ever go to a Sabbath service, there's one prayer, the Shema, that we say, and not even just on the Sabbath, but Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And so to us, that obviously is the main pillar of what we believe. But yeah, for if there was someone in here, if Kayla, my Jewish student, says, I consider myself Jewish, but I don't believe in God, I would talk to her about that, but I would still consider her Jewish, because again, we're such a small minority to say that people aren't Jewish because of everything that they believe in would probably eliminate a lot of Jews in the world.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah. Could you say that Judaism is not just a religion but an ethnicity?
So I was going to speak about that earlier. It's a great question, because I'm, again, on these trips to Israel that I lead, a question always comes up. And what we'll do is we'll put a group of the students in a room, and we'll say, okay, go to this one corner if you think this, and go to the other corner if you think this. And one question we always ask is, do you consider yourself an American Jew or a Jewish American? And so it's I'm not even sure what makes one different than the other, because then students say, well, the students that I take, if I'm saying am I a Jewish American, does that mean I consider myself Jewish first, who happens to also be American? Or if I say I'm an American Jew, that means do I consider myself to be American first, and then who also believes in Judaism? So I believe that it is definitely an ethnic thing, I think, in America. But in Israel, it's obviously a different story, because it is the Jewish state. And so, in Israel, it's funny because unless you're an Orthodox Jew living in Israel, a lot of the Israelis who are Jewish are not very observant. To the fact that when you go visit, when I take these students to Israel, and part of the trip is meeting other Israelis who are Jewish, they find out that they aren't observant or really do anything at all to be Jewish, to observe in a way that probably some of the North Americans who are on this trip observe much more, whether they're with their families on Friday night or they have different holiday observances. But to answer your question, yes, I do believe that in this day and age, and at least in the United States, in North America, because that's what I'm most familiar with, is that it is an ethnic thing and a faith as well.
Right. I'd like to do that test with the corners with Muslim students. That'd be interesting. Are you Muslim American or American Muslim? But we won't do it right now. All right. This is the last question I have, and it's an interesting one. Can a Muslim woman put down in her marriage contract that her husband cannot marry another woman? Right? By traditional law, a husband can marry 4 women. It's in the Quran, so turn it over.
Okay, she can, obviously, but it all boils down to whether, I mean, if he chooses to marry someone else, right? What the question actually should be, what do you want, right? Whenever I get asked this question, I'm like, okay, so how will that change anything in terms of the future, right? I mean, he can acknowledge that he has a contract where he said, no, I will not, what does that contract actually mean, I guess? So does it mean that he is no longer permitted to marry another wife? And
That's
if
right.
that's the question, I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if he agreed, and
Right, but there's the slight difference of opinion there, though, is that some ulama actually say that no, you cannot even, that contract isn't even binding because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already permitted him in the Quran to have more than one wife. Therefore, the actual condition in itself is invalid. Again, I'm just letting you know what the differences of opinion are. I'm not saying that, okay, I agree with one or the other. You should know, though, that they exist. So, for example, some of the Azhari scholars who argue that, well, the contract itself is not binding for him, like he'll sign it, but it doesn't really mean anything, right? Majority of Muslim scholars say, no, you signed a contract, it's binding, right? Like Imam Abu Hanifa is like big on contracts, like whatever it said, you need to follow that, right? But the ultimate question again is, okay, if a man wants to have a second wife, and if you are not okay with that, then why are you marrying him? You know, I mean, that's kind of my question for in the first place, unless, of course, and again, this is like my Western, you know, privileged understanding of this whole situation, right? Obviously, there may be women who are in this situation and, you know, are living in spaces where this is considered kind of the norm, maybe, or even something that's valued to a certain extent. So, you know, maybe I was joking a little too much there, but can she do that? Yes. The simple answer is yes, she can put that in her contract, and, you know, he should at least honor that contract. If he chooses not to, then again, he can marry someone else and you can move on as well.
She just better not be tall because you have to give a lot of cows, right? Really short.
No, just to add to her, yeah, it's very good because most women and the parents, the father, don't know that they can do that, and they can put in the contract and actually can send in the complaint. What if you violate? This can happen. So the man has to see what is the difference between the Muslim marriage is the contract. With other religion, I just learned that they don't have that. So man has an obligation to follow or abide by the contract. If he doesn't do, that's the separate story. There's a violation of the contract. But the woman, the groom, or the parent of the mother, you know, bride can write that. There's a part of the contract. Yes, during my lifetime, you cannot have a second wife, and this can be done because most people don't know. So this you right, you know, you say also the education separate thing. That's because there's a contract. There's several things you can put down in the contract. Because most, you know, I think this question was very, you know, well taken. That for the sake of knowledge, people should understand that yes, you can add those things in the contract. Thank you.
Right. I think that if we have no more questions, then we have arrived at the end of our time together. I want to thank our panelists. They've been really fantastic in answering our questions, and it's been a very enlightening afternoon. So thank you all.
Thank you for that good discussion. I hope you all benefited from it. I just wanted to make a quick announcement. The trivia night is the next event. It's downstairs in the shack from 5 to 6 p.m. and it's going to be a trivia night. So I hope to see you all there.
Also, one small announcement. If you're going home, there's a severe thunderstorm warning in Burke County, so be careful. You'll find out, it'll be wet outside. So don't go home, there's a severe thunderstorm warning. Stick around with us, you'll be dry.
Allah set that up, man. Stay here.